They test you because you let them, not consciously, not deliberately, but consistently. Every hierarchy operates on probes. Every social structure applies pressure to determine resistance. Testing is not hostility, it is reconnaissance. From the first interaction, assessment begins. A delayed reply, a subtle interruption, a dismissive tone masked as humor, a small request that oversteps boundaries. These are not accidents, they are diagnostic tools. The objective is simple. Measure your tolerance. Human beings are opportunistic within structure. They expand until they meet resistance. If resistance is weak or inconsistent, expansion continues. If resistance is firm and controlled, recalibration occurs. Most individuals do not recalibrate consciously. They simply adjust their behavior to the feedback received. If you accept disrespect once, you have provided data. If you accept it twice, you have established precedent. Precedent becomes expectation. Expectation becomes role. The reason you are tested is not because others are uniquely aggressive. It is because social dynamics are fluid. Position is never permanently assigned. It is negotiated repeatedly through behavior. Every interaction either reinforces or reshapes hierarchy. Observe professional environments. A colleague arrives late to meetings, subtly cutting into your speaking time. If you ignore it, the pattern continues. If you laugh it off, the pattern strengthens. If you calmly address it once, the dynamic shifts. The test was not personal, it was structural. They were measuring the cost of encroachment. Encroachment without cost invites repetition. Testing occurs most frequently at the beginning of new relationships because roles are undefined. During this phase, boundaries are elastic. Whoever defines them first gains advantage. If you over-explain, over-apologize, or over-accommodate, you signal pliability. Pliability is interpreted as low resistance. Resistance is not aggression, it is clarity. Many confuse politeness with submission. They believe restraint protects reputation. In reality, uncontrolled accommodation lowers perceived value. Humans assign worth partly through scarcity and difficulty. If access to your time, attention, or approval is effortless, it depreciates. Testing also reveals your emotional thresholds. Teasing escalates to see when irritation surfaces. Criticism intensifies to measure defensiveness. Demands increase to observe compliance. Each reaction supplies information. Once your trigger points are mapped, manipulation becomes efficient. Predictability invites exploitation. Consider social gatherings. Someone makes a joke at your expense. The room observes not the joke, but your reaction. If you force laughter, you authorize continuation. If you respond with measured composure and subtle redirection, the test ends. Not because the individual fears you, but because the data suggests resistance. Hierarchy is often decided in seconds. Romantic dynamics operate similarly. A partner withdraws attention briefly to test pursuit. If you chase immediately, you confirm dependency. If you remain composed and unaffected, the tactic loses utility. The test existed to gauge leverage. You either confirm it or deny it. They test you because they need to know how far they can go. Even authority figures engage in testing. A superior assigns excessive workload beyond agreed scope. If you accept silently, scope expands permanently. If you negotiate calmly, limits become defined. Authority respects structure, not emotion. In every case, the principle is identical. People probe boundaries to determine position. Those who lack internal clarity project uncertainty. Uncertainty invites pressure. Why do most individuals allow testing? Because they fear confrontation more than subordination. They prefer short-term comfort over long-term authority. They mistake temporary peace for stability. But unaddressed tests accumulate. Each unchallenged overstep narrows your space. Gradually, you become reactive rather than directive. Others set tone, others set pace, others set expectations. This is not malice, it is hierarchy in motion. There is also the psychology of self-doubt. When tested, many question whether they are overreacting. They hesitate, calculating social risk. That hesitation is visible. Micro-expressions, tone shifts, delayed responses, all communicate internal uncertainty. The tester interprets hesitation as permission. Confidence is less about volume and more about immediacy. A timely, composed correction prevents escalation. Testing intensifies when you display need. Need for approval, inclusion, validation, advancement. Need reduces bargaining power. Those who sense it instinctively push limits because they assume you will tolerate discomfort to preserve access. Scarcity of self-respect creates abundance of intrusion. Some individuals are chronic testers. They rely on dominance to secure position. Others test unconsciously, following learned patterns. The distinction is irrelevant. The outcome depends on your response. When boundaries are unclear internally, they are unclear externally. If you do not define what is acceptable, others will define it for you. Silence communicates consent in social dynamics. Even if your silence is strategic internally, it is often interpreted externally as acquiescence. Therefore, silence must be paired with posture, tone, or action that signals awareness. Controlled eye contact, brief pause, measured reply. Subtle but decisive correction. Power rarely requires spectacle, it requires precision. The most dangerous pattern is delayed retaliation. Suppressing discomfort repeatedly and then reacting explosively destroys credibility. Controlled early resistance is respected. Emotional late resistance is dismissed. You are tested because hierarchy seeks clarity. Every environment, from corporate boardrooms to informal friendships, is a negotiation of space. Those who project undefined boundaries are evaluated repeatedly. Testing stops when the cost-benefit calculation changes. When overstepping produces friction without emotional drama, continuation becomes inefficient. The first stage of authority is not dominance. It is boundary recognition. Understand this clearly. People do not test those who consistently enforce structure. They test those who fluctuate. Inconsistency is interpreted as weakness. Consistency is interpreted as strength. If you want testing to decrease, eliminate ambiguity. What follows is the deeper architecture behind these probes, the psychological incentives and evolutionary mechanisms that make testing inevitable. Testing is not random behavior. It is rooted in evolutionary psychology and reinforced by modern incentive structures. To understand why they test you, you must examine what they gain from it. At the core of every hierarchy lies uncertainty. No position is ever fully secure. Even leaders are assessed constantly. Competence, confidence, composure, all are evaluated through interaction. Testing is the mechanism through which this evaluation occurs. In primitive environments, misjudging strength could be fatal. Individuals learn to probe before committing. A subtle challenge revealed whether confrontation would be costly. That instinct never disappeared. It evolved into social form. Today, the probes are quieter, but the function remains identical. A coworker interrupts to see if you reclaim the floor. A friend cancels plans last minute to measure how much inconvenience you will tolerate. A superior imposes unreasonable urgency to observe whether you comply without negotiation. Every probe seeks data. Specifically, it seeks the cost of disrespect. If the cost is low, the behavior scales. There is also a reputational dimension. When someone tests you publicly, observers collect information. They are not judging the initiator alone. They are watching you. Your response calibrates how others will treat you in future interactions. One unaddressed slight can multiply across an entire network. This multiplication effect is why testing persists in competitive environments. Humans are acutely sensitive to social ranking. Subtle dominance displays who speaks last, who is deferred to, who sets the agenda, communicate hierarchy without explicit declaration. If you consistently concede micro-dominance moments, you gradually occupy a lower rung. Testing is also driven by incentive asymmetry. If someone benefits from expanding their influence over you, they will attempt it. Influence may mean access to your time, emotional labor, resources, or compliance. Expansion is rewarded, restraint rarely is. Without resistance, expansion becomes rational. Consider workplace dynamics again. An employee who never refuses additional tasks becomes the default recipient of overflow work. Management is not necessarily exploiting maliciously. They are optimizing efficiency. The path of least resistance becomes the path of assignment. You are tested because systems reward those who test. There is also psychological projection. Individuals uncertain of their own standing will test others to stabilize themselves. By confirming that you tolerate encroachment, they elevate their perceived position. Testing becomes a method of self-reassurance. Weakness seeks confirmation of comparative strength. Another factor is emotional opportunism. When someone senses fatigue, distraction, or vulnerability, they are more likely to push boundaries. Humans are attuned to fluctuations in others. A slight drop in confidence invites trial. If resistance returns immediately, the attempt stops. If not, it embeds. Your state influences the frequency of testing. In romantic or social hierarchies, testing often takes the form of withdrawal or delayed response. This creates uncertainty. Uncertainty generates pursuit if the other party feels imbalance. The initiator learns who holds emotional leverage. Leverage, once confirmed, becomes structural. Testing also functions as filtration. High-status individuals unconsciously screen for resilience. Those who withstand pressure are treated differently than those who fold. This is not always benevolent. It is pragmatic. Stable alliances require predictable strength. If you consistently absorb pressure without recalibration, you are categorized as low threat. Notice how dominance is often established early. The first few interactions determine long-term tone. If you laugh at condescension during initial meetings, that tone may persist indefinitely. Early correction requires minimal effort. Late correction requires confrontation. Prevention is strategically superior to repair. Many individuals avoid early correction because they overestimate social cost. They imagine confrontation will damage relationships. In reality, controlled boundary enforcement often increases respect. It clarifies expectations. Ambiguity creates more tension than precision. The hidden mechanism beneath testing is risk assessment. Every person you encounter is calculating, consciously or not, how much risk is involved in pushing against you. Your consistency determines that calculation. If your responses fluctuate, strong one day, passive the next, you create confusion. Confusion invites continued experimentation. Stability discourages it. Emotional volatility is particularly destabilizing. If you react intensely to minor issues but ignore significant ones, others cannot map your thresholds accurately. They will continue testing to gather clearer data. Clarity eliminates repeated probing. It is also important to understand that some tests are cooperative rather than adversarial. In leadership environments, subordinates may challenge directives to assess confidence and clarity. If the leader collapses under questioning, authority weakens. If the leader responds with composure and logic, legitimacy strengthens. Testing, in this context, refines hierarchy rather than undermines it. The problem arises when you interpret all testing as personal offense. That interpretation triggers ego response. Ego response escalates unnecessarily. The objective is not to dominate every interaction. It is to calibrate cost accurately. Sometimes a light correction suffices. Sometimes silence combined with steady eye contact communicates enough. Sometimes explicit negotiation is required. The method depends on context, but the principle remains. Overstep must encounter structure. Without structure, encroachment compounds. In highly competitive arenas, individuals may test repeatedly even after resistance. This is persistence, not proof of your weakness. They are searching for inconsistency. If they detect none, attempts diminish. Consistency outlasts aggression. Understand the architecture clearly. Testing is fueled by evolutionary instinct, incentivized by modern systems, amplified by audience observation, and guided by cost-benefit analysis. It continues where tolerance exists. You are not tested because you are unlucky. You are tested because you present variable resistance or perceived gain. The final stage is strategic execution. How to eliminate unnecessary tests without theatrical dominance. How to project calibrated authority that reduces probing before it begins. Eliminating unnecessary tests does not require intimidation. It requires calibrated signals delivered consistently enough to reshape cost calculations. When people sense structure before probing, they conserve energy and redirect effort elsewhere. The first execution principle is immediate micro-correction. When interrupted, continue speaking without raising volume. When someone attempts to speak over you, finish your sentence deliberately, then invite them in on your terms. The correction is subtle but unmistakable. You are not asking for permission to complete your thought. You are completing it. This conditions future behavior without spectacle. Second, compress explanations. Over-explaining signals insecurity. When declining a request, state the boundary once without apology layered inside justification. Length invites negotiation, precision closes it. I won't be available for that. Silence. Let the statement stand. The discomfort that follows belongs to the requester, not to you. Discomfort is often misinterpreted as danger. It is frequently just recalibration. Third, control tempo. Many tests rely on speed, rapid demands, sudden shifts, artificial urgency. Slow your cadence. Respond after a measured pause. Ask one clarifying question. Tempo communicates authority more reliably than volume. The one who sets pace defines psychological ground. Fourth, detach from validation. If approval fuels your decisions, others will test through withdrawal. They will reduce warmth to see whether you compensate. Do not chase temperature changes. Maintain consistent demeanor regardless of fluctuations. Stability removes leverage. Fifth, establish visible standards early. In professional settings, clarify expectations before conflict arises. Define scope, timelines, roles. When standards are documented, deviations are easier to address without emotion. Structure preempts testing because the rules are externalized. Ambiguity invites experimentation. Clarity limits it. Sixth, cultivate controlled unpredictability, not erratic behavior, but strategic variation. If your reactions are formulaic, they become exploitable. Occasionally respond to minor provocations with silence. At other times, address them directly. The objective is not confusion. It is to prevent a precise behavioral map from forming. Seventh, manage public perception deliberately. If you allow subtle disrespect publicly, observers recalibrate their treatment of you. Correct gently but visibly. Let me finish. Short, calm. The room absorbs the signal. Authority is reinforced not through aggression but through composure under pressure. Eighth, reward respect. When someone adjusts behavior positively, acknowledge it indirectly. Give attention where boundaries are honored. Reinforcement works both ways. If you only punish overstep without recognizing alignment, interactions become adversarial rather than structured. Hierarchy stabilizes when expectations are predictable. Ninth, refuse emotional escalation. Some tests are designed to provoke reaction. If you respond with irritation, the initiator gains narrative advantage. Stay measured. When emotion fails to produce effect, the tactic becomes inefficient. Control of self precedes control of dynamic. 10th, know when to withdraw entirely. Not every environment deserves calibration. In chronically disrespectful structures where testing is constant and aggressive, departure may be more strategic than confrontation. Authority cannot flourish where the culture rewards encroachment. Strategic retreat preserves leverage. Now consider advanced application. In negotiations, introduce a small boundary early to assess reaction. For example, decline a minor unfavorable term. Observe whether pressure intensifies or respect increases. This reveals the other party's strategy before stakes rise. Controlled resistance is diagnostic. In leadership roles, allow limited questioning without surrendering directive clarity. Invite scrutiny of logic, not of authority itself. If someone attempts to undermine position rather than evaluate decision, redirect calmly to substance. Separate critique of plan from critique of role. Role must remain intact. In romantic or social hierarchies, respond to withdrawal tests with neutrality. If communication slows, do not compensate with increased pursuit. Maintain rhythm. If interest is genuine, equilibrium returns. If it was leverage testing, the tactic dissolves when ineffective. Leverage requires asymmetry. Remove asymmetry. Testing frequency also declines when you display internal alignment. If your actions, tone, and decisions reflect coherent standards, others stop searching for cracks. Inconsistency signals opportunity. Alignment signals solidity. Remember that dominance is often quiet. It is expressed through eye contact held a second longer, through posture that does not contract under pressure, through speech that does not rush to justify itself. These signals operate beneath conscious analysis. They shape how others categorize you. Categorization determines behavior toward you. Another crucial execution principle is emotional neutrality toward correction. If you enforce a boundary with visible resentment, you communicate fragility. If you enforce it as routine maintenance, you communicate normalcy. Maintenance is respected. Fragility is challenged again. Treat overstep as administrative, not personal. Over time, consistent structure reduces incoming tests dramatically. Not because human nature changes, but because cost assessment updates. People conserve effort where return is low. When pushing you produces no gain and slight friction, they allocate energy elsewhere. You become inefficient to challenge. There will always be rare individuals who test persistently regardless of resistance. With them, escalation must be proportional and decisive. Clear statement, clear consequence. Follow through once. Repetition is unnecessary when consequence is credible. Credibility ends cycles. Understand the full arc now. They test because hierarchy demands clarity. They test because incentives reward expansion. They test because you have previously allowed ambiguity. When you remove ambiguity through calm, consistent enforcement, testing declines to minimal functional levels. Authority is not loud. It is structured. You do not need to dominate every room. You need to eliminate signals of negotiable self-respect. Once that signal disappears, most probes dissolve before they form. They test you because you let them. When you stop letting them, not through aggression but through precision, the dynamic recalibrates. Hierarchy settles. Position stabilizes. Influence increases without announcement. The lesson is not confrontation. It is structural awareness executed with discipline. The adjustment begins immediately in the smallest interaction, and from that point forward, the tests become fewer, shorter, and eventually strategic rather than opportunistic.